My first question is in relation to the decision yesterday, to your successful attempt to discuss and to debate the Iran protests in the European Parliament. Could you kindly update us about what happened yesterday?
Well, thank you for having me. The decision to have a debate and a resolution on the serious breaches of human rights in Iran during the last month's protest was taken yesterday by the European Parliament. Despite some wanting to postpone that debate until January, it's a very good decision because I think that the sooner the European Parliament can take a strong stance on this and condemn this disproportionate violence by the regime, the better.
Also, previous to that, there has also been attempts by you of having a moments of silence in Parliament. Can you tell us about that and how many MEPs are supporting that?
There were about 20 MEPs supporting the letter that I sent to President of the European Parliament, David Sassoli, this Friday. And the reason I took this initiative is that the EU commits itself in the Lisbon Treaty, which is a foundational document for the European Union, to promote human rights in general, but especially for children. And what we've seen from the shocking from Iran is that people are being executed, bodies are being moved from morgues out in the desert to be buried, children are being killed. So in order to live up to its commitment, now having learned about this situation in Iran, this is the least the European Parliament could do, a minute of silence for the victims in Iran.
But you have also been very vocal since the beginning of the Iran protests. I mean, on the 28th, you stood up, in Parliament and spoke up about the protests when Europe itself, the European Union, was silent.
Well, for me, it was important to send a signal to the Iranian people that not everyone is willing to bow to the mullahs, that there are Europeans who see how hard they suffer, what totalitarianism they are living under, and that they know, people like me actually know, the real spirit of the Iranian people. And this is why I held that speech, and this is the reason I keep doing this. And it comes out of my personal experience, having got to know Iranians in Sweden, liberal Iranians, monarchist Iranians, people with different viewpoints, but with the same yearn for liberty for their homeland. So as a foreign policy politician here in the European Parliament, I want to be a voice for that and to transfer their experience, their yearning for liberty to this House.
On December 9th, the European foreign ministers agreed to institute and to set up a Magnitsky-style sanctions policy in Europe.
I do see signs of hope. I really do, because let's remember where we come from. We come from a situation where young women are being jailed in Iran while High Representative Mogherini agrees to meet with the regime in Tehran, wearing the hijab and really signaling nothing like solidarity with these young Iranian women. We're moving from that to a situation where High Representative Borrell opens up for a Magnitsky Act, which is a very good step, because the Magnitsky Act would make it possible to direct individual sanctions against those who are perpetrators of the latest massacres in Iran. And in that sense, it's a very positive signal. So even though I'm realistic on the wider Iran policy of the European Union as of now, I think that we should welcome any every step in the right direction.
On November 9th, Swedish authorities invoked international legislation to prosecute individuals for a crime against humanity to arrest Hamid Nouri, an Iranian suspected of being a deputy prosecutor engaged in the torture and execution of political prisoners in Iran in 1988. Can you give us any update about that?
Yes. So the center-left government of Sweden has had a quite appeasing policy towards Tehran, but Sweden is a country of rule of law. And if you have committed crimes in the past, Sweden will not forget that, because this is potentially breaches against human rights, and that's an international crime. And so in that sense, the arrest of Hamid Nouri is an extremely positive thing, because it sends the signal to not only the regime in Iran, the Islamic Republic, but to other regimes that your crimes will not be forgotten. You will never be able to travel freely without the risk of actually being arrested, detained, and in order to avoid more massacres in the future, I think that these actions are extremely powerful.
And if I may, as a last question, because many of our viewers or readers might not be as familiar with the inner workings of the European Parliament. You've been, although you were elected last year, you've been serving in the European Parliament for over 5 years. You are in the European Parliament side, but most of the decisions as far as foreign policy is taken by the foreign ministers in the European External Action Commission. So can you please explain to us, how will this affect what you are trying to do in Iran, in the European Parliament, in respect of Iran?
So every decision made on foreign policy by the European Parliament is being communicated to the European Council, where the foreign ministers meet. And they can choose to adhere to it, they can choose to another direction, but it's always being communicated. So in that sense, it's a strong tool for shaping policy in Europe. It's a strong tool for shaping public opinion. And also, it has a potential influence outside Europe. I was among the draftsmen of the resolution in the European Parliament that recognized the atrocities committed by ISIS against Yazidis and Christians as a genocide. And even though the European Council did not adhere to that, unfortunately, it was an obvious genocide in my eyes. This was used by our friends in the United States to influence the Obama administration to recognize the genocide, which they finally did. So foreign policy in the European Parliament can have a real vital influence, even though the final say on European foreign policy is done by the ministers of each country together.
And before we go, being in London and having just had elections and having Boris Johnson as Prime Minister and Brexit taking place by the end of January, how will this affect, not having the Brits with you in the European Parliament, how will this affect what you are trying to do?
Well, the Conservatives is in the same group as I am, the Conservative and Reformist group. So we will miss them, because we have worked together on foreign policy in a very good way, on Iran, where we stand for a much tougher line than the majority in this House, on Russia and other vital security issues. We will miss them. I'm not going to lie about that. On the other hand, I congratulate the Tory party for actually being able to fulfill the wish of the majority of Britons. But hopefully, a United Kingdom outside the European Union will be able to exert a freer role, meaning that it will be more active than the EU has been, less appeasing and confronting tyrannical regimes in a traditional British way.